Mr. Speaker, we need to address certain things. The Nigerian youth, social media, yes, though good, has its negative impact. Let me first thank you for condemning the wanton killing and carnage that happened at Lekki. When I went through the comments, I did not believe it. The curses, the abuses from children.
You don't win election, so you don't care anymore. 29 million, you be seeing it all. You done the match also, but you say make me not talk. Oh. Say me police you know they shoot us, but you bring soldier. Wahala dey, if you know, wahala dey, and they kill us. Wahala dey, if you know, wahala dey, and they kill us. So that's okay.
Before this all started, we had reports that the CCTV cameras and all the lights at the scene were put off, and then the security operatives fired shots, resulting in people scampering to safety.
With the camcorder, people don't die and they won't go down. Now only God know who go settle the matter, cause I don't know where the country they walk out. Now who go die next, and I mean you're my brother. Now how will you think that we know this the pattern? Who get the order to shoot us all? Who get the order to kill us all? If you don't know, and they kill us, if you don't know, then they kill us, so that's okay. If you don't know, then they kill us, if you don't know, then they kill us, so that's okay.
People having the effrontery to enter an Oba's palace, hold the staff of office. Culture is gone. Mr. Speaker, in the next 5 years, there will be no Nigeria.
Hello. Good day, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome.
It is so wonderful to be back with our 7th Pan-African Activist Sunday School. And this time we are back on a very special occasion. This is the NSAR's 2-year anniversary Sunday School, where we are focused on how we continue the Pan-African struggle.
Yes, and it's been a very important time, over the past week, over the past 10 days in Nigeria and in other parts of the world. People have continued to mark the 2-year anniversary of the NSAR's protests. And the theme for this year was justice. And so the main focus has been to focus on justice for the victims, for those who are still incarcerated, for the victims that have not yet received compensation, many of which are still suffering. And so it's really, we're so happy to be able to be here today to mark this. And even as we are marking this occasion, this 2-year anniversary, we just got news yesterday that a similar event has just taken place in Chad, where innocent protesters also bearing the flag, just like it happened in the NSAR's movement, bearing a flag, bearing a national flag, were gunned down by the government. And so we continue to see this repetition of history. And so it's so important to continue to place the struggle for NSARS within this Pan-African context. And it's really great that we're going to be able to do that today. We have a great group of people, organizers, activists, and also people that have been affected, the victims, who are going to be speaking to us today. So really looking forward to this conversation with everyone here.
So why don't we take a step back for a moment? We haven't even introduced ourselves. I'm Crystal Strong, and
I'm Nanre Nafsagar.
And we are the co-conveners of the Pan-African Activist Solidarity Collective, which is what is behind bringing you the Sunday School today. But perhaps we should take a small step back and talk about NSARS for those of you who may be hearing about NSARS for the first time or who just need a refresher on why it is so important for us to mark the 2-year anniversary of this important rebellion and struggle?
Yes, of course. We so in NSARS, the two, as we said, the 2-year anniversary is actually, it's not actually an anniversary of the entire movement. The October 20th marks kind of a particular moment in the history. But NSARS was a movement that was started about 5 years ago, actually, but didn't really take hold. We often see times there was a few protests that took place, and SARS is the Special Anti-Robbery Squad of the Nigerian police. And it's a particular squad that has been extremely violent, although state violence occurs across many agencies in the country. But this particular unit was known to target young people, was known to, abduct people, to actually kill people, to harm them physically, accused of rape, accused of murder, extrajudicial killings. They would stop young men and young women on the street who had cell phones, who had they would ask them to, they would go through their phones, they would ask them to go to the ATM and get money. And so this particular squad was seen as very violent and very much attacking of young people. So in October 2020, and we'll hear more about this from the mouths of those who were actually there at that moment. The uprising swelled with a video that went viral, and young people across Nigeria began to take to the streets. And it wasn't just in Nigeria, it was actually all over the world. There were protests in Europe, there were protests in North America, even in Asia, Australia, and also in Africa. In other countries, there were supportive protests in Ghana and South Africa. And so this really it swelled to a movement that encompassed like millions of people were on the streets at one point. But after 10 days, after the protests had gone on for about 2 weeks, on October 20th, and even during the protest, protesters were being murdered. They were murdered in Ibadan, they were murdered in Abuja, in the east. And so there were actually people being gunned down even before October 20th. But October 20th is a day that we mark collectively because it was the most overt and systematic display of state violence when the state descended upon protesters at Lekki toll gate in Lagos and actually gunned them down, turned off the lights, and gunned down protesters who were just singing the national anthem and holding their flags. And it really marked a turning point. The movement did not necessarily die, but the entire street protest, even though the next few days were followed by other forms of protest, including the sharing of COVID palliatives, as well as burning, what is also called looting across the country. So things were really on fire for the next few days. But after that, the movement kind of came into a lull. And even though there have been people that have been in prison for 2 years, and we'll hear from one of them today, the movement has continued, but it has definitely reached a different stage in which it is no longer as popular and as mainstream as it was before. So yeah, that's a bit of a background. And as I said, we will hear from some of the key organizers on the front lines today who can say much better than I can more about the struggle.
Yes, and that is such important context, particularly as we look back, right, to think about where this began. And also in thinking about where the Pan-African Activist Sunday School began, we have to think about NSARS because 2 years ago, almost, the Sunday School began as the NSARS Solidarity Network. We came together as organizers throughout the world who were in the midst in 2020 of struggles against state violence, right? Struggles for African liberation, Black liberation. And we saw the need to be supportive of the NSARS movement in a very vulnerable moment after the government massacred its own young people, right? And so part of what is important to note about us gathering is that we are all representing movements throughout the Pan-African world. We are ourselves organizers, right? And so this is a platform in which we convene with people who are on the front lines of our movements. We need a direct conduit for information and political education and understanding across the various places where Black and African people are struggling for our freedom. And so today's program, this NSARS 2-year anniversary program, is a really special gathering of folks who can speak to the movement, who can speak to what has happened in the past 2 years after the cameras have gone away, after the international media has gone away, right? We are going to have an opportunity to hear directly from folks who were and are in the movement, what has happened in the 2 years since the Lekki massacre, since, NSARS really got really key global attention. We'll also hear from other contexts of struggle. We have some wonderful guests who will be able to share with us what has happened in Uganda, what has happened and is happening in the US, particularly around victims of state violence and how we fight for justice for those who are abused by the state, those who are disappeared by the state. We'll also have a focus on political prisoners who are the folks who are freedom fighters or wrapped up in struggles and are targeted by the state. And we'll also have an opportunity to really digest the lessons of the past 2 years and think about how we strengthen our Pan-African fight, how we strengthen our Pan-African movements.
Yeah, and yeah, really looking forward to the conversation, and so thankful to have these amazing organizers with us today. So yeah, I think we're gonna kick right off. We have a few parts here today. We're going to be talking about the movement 2 years on. Then we're going to shift over to talking more about state violence and justice, and then we're just going to keep going. But if you have questions and comments, please put them in the chat. It is not, but we're interacting in that way. So on Twitter, wherever you are, on Twitter, YouTube, on Facebook, you can just put questions in the chat. So I'm very pleased to welcome my dear comrades to this first part of the conversation. The first person here who's on the screen with us is Comrade Juwan Sanya Olu, and he's the coordinator of the national coordinator of the Take It Back movement. He's a citizen journalist and has been organizing with student movements and various social movements, I think, all of his life. I wonder if he got up walking and was in the struggle. He was at the front lines of the NSARS movement, organizing in physically at the Alausa barricade, but also organizing nationally and internationally, through other means. And then the second person here today is Comrade Ayoyinka Oni. He's also a human rights activist and a member of the NSARS United Group. He's a coordinator of the Take It Back movement in Lagos and an organizer during the NSARS struggle. He currently organizes with Revolution Now. So welcome, comrades. And please, yeah. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
So let's get started. And perhaps let's start with you, Juwan. Take us back to October 2020. Where were you in the struggle? Can you share a bit about what you experienced in just a few minutes?
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot, Comrade, and I'm really happy to be on this show. And let me say, contrary to what many that NSAS actually started in 2020, NSAS was a movement that only climaxed 2020, but it did not start 2020. Actually, it was a movement that I started in 2017. And at least I still remember being part of two protests in 2017 over the disbandment of SARS, where the Buhari government made promises to disband the Google unit, but never did anything after the service. And then we had a similar movement in 2019 when Kolade was killed. Kolade was someone who just came in from South Africa, escaped the xenophobia in South Africa, come to take shelter in Nigeria, and was only to be met with death in the hands of SARS. So we had Tina. So there were movements also in 2019. But the NSAS movement, like I said earlier, climaxed only in 2020. And at this time, it started first with a general discontent with the state of things within and practically, you remember, it was also a COVID year, so there were a lot of piling frustrations everywhere. And as a movement organizer, we were in fact met us at the period where we were organizing against the Nigerian government that had failed to provide some sort of social security for its citizens in the course of year longer, in a year, it's because of the months longer, what I call it, shutdown, COVID-19 shutdown. So, and so that going forward, we as movement organizers, we organized a protest on October 1 to demand accountability and systemic justice as pertains to the general sufferings in the land. And so the October 1 protest, then the October 1 protest then become some sort of template around which Nigerians were
Comrade, sorry to interrupt you. Is there any way your sound is a bit unclear? So I don't know if you can. Are you using headphones? If you can, I
oh
don't know.
yes, I'm using my earphone. Using my
Okay.
earphone. So is it better now? Is it
Yes,
better now?
it's better.
Okay. All right. So probably I won't be the one to hear you clearly, but I think it's better if you can hear me.
Actually, no, the background noise is worse. You can go back to the previous one, but just try to speak up. Yeah.
All right, so though I will just try to manage. I'll try to manage. So as I said earlier, so the NSAS movement met us at a period, particularly me, when we had just organized an October 1 mass protest that happened in across 20 states across the federation, and it was a protest that also went ahead to demand good governance and accountability from the Nigerian state. Of course, in the course of the protest, over 100 activists were arrested nationwide. But then, we at the period we were still trying to release some of our comrades that were arrested by the Nigerian government as a result of the October 1 protest we had coordinated. We heard in another news that SARS had launched another violent attack on an innocent young person. His name is also Nicholas, interestingly. State, I think Ugeli to be precise, and this triggered a lot of emotional outbursts. It's like some sort of some sort of anger that had already been painted, that had already accumulated within the minds of a lot of us, and eventually we declared another action for which started particularly for October 8th, because I knowing fully well that we had just freshly released over 100 activists that were arrested since October. We freshly released them in October 7th, so only for us to go back to the streets on the 8th of October. So particularly, I was with other comrades in at what are you calling it, the office of the Commissioner for Police. That's where we started in Lagos, and then the others were also marching in Abuja, so that by the second day, which was the 9th of October, we moved from the office of the Commissioner for Police. We marched down to the Alausa barricade, and from there the protest continued, and it never stopped until the Nigerian government brought it down violently. And it was a protest that was coordinated nationwide. Even within Lagos only, there were several barricades. I can't even count the number of barricades that were within Lagos State. But of course, most people only know about Lekki and Alausa barricade in Ikeja. But they were up to like over 60 barricades in Lagos already. Even in Ikeja, Alausa is part of Ikeja. In Ikeja alone, I know for certain, and we took stock of it. We had about 20 barricades in Ikeja that I know of in Ikeja, because we took stock of it, and we took stock of these barricades because whenever we're trying to move food and materials from barricade to barricade and down to Alausa, we pass through each and every one of these barricades. About 20 of them that we have records of, and it was a movement that was coordinated, organized by sheer desire and will of young people desirous of change. But of course, the demand for NSAS was reflecting a larger demand of putting total end to systemic impunity, which is both social and economic.
Yeah, thank you so much, Juan, for sharing that. And it's so important that you highlight kind of the nature of the struggle. Oftentimes people only focus on Lekki because there was a massacre there. But as you said, there were so many barricades, and from the pictures we can see from Alausa to the airports, and such a richness and such a story that has not yet even been told, even 2 years later. And hopefully today we'll be sharing part of that story, and we'll continue to share it. So I'm going to shift over. Thanks for sharing your own experiences, and hopefully we'll be able to share more as we go through the program. But I want to switch over to Irinka and ask you, what has happened in the movement over the past 2 years? What has happened into the organizing landscape? And what has been the focus for organizing? Can you speak a bit about what has happened? Also, I know there were judicial panels that took place. You've also been working with some of the political prisoners. Tell us what's been happening over the last 2 years in a few minutes as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. Yes, for the last 2 years, immediately there was a massacre, and we call October 20th the day of the massacre, not because killing started on October 20th. The killing started even before 20th. Ibadan, Jimoh was not killed on October 20th. Some people were killed at Orile too before.
I think you're frozen, comrade. Oh, it seems like we've lost him. Okay. So maybe
Okay.
while he's trying to
I think
get
I can.
back, yes, you can join. Yes, please.
Okay, all right. So I think I can pick up from where it started. If you can hear me properly. Can you hear me properly? Because I'm back with my headset. All right. Thank you. So because it is very true that killings really did not start on 20th of October. We witnessed there were killings in Oyo State, as was trying to talk about. Even in Lagos, there had been 3 persons had been killed in Lagos, in Surulere to be precise. I think that happened sometime around 18th or 17th of October. Thereabout in Surulere, 3 persons were killed, and even in Osun State, we had a scenario where 2 persons had been killed in Osun State already. I think that was on the 15th of October, where the governor's convoy ran against the protesters, and they were shooting carelessly. And because of them shooting carelessly, two persons were hit by bullets. Scores were injured. So these killings had started even long before October 20th. And in October 20th, killings did not only took place at Lekki toll gate. Okay, thank you. I think Ayo is back, so I can step back. Okay, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. So
Sorry,
Irinka, you're
I
back.
had a network glitch. I don't know even where I cut off. So let me
We
just
didn't hear much.
try to rephrase. So basically, young Nigerians have replied the repression of the protests with peace, both from thuggery and killing. Yes, I'm back. Thank you. So the repression started even before 20th, but on 20th it reached its climax where they deployed soldiers, to different parts of Lagos State and even other parts of Nigeria. In Lalausa, they came. At Ojo, they came in Igandu. Then Mushi, also those areas of Lagos State. But so immediately there was a massacre. We understood that a government cannot kill its citizens and still claim to be a legitimate government. That government should resign. That government should be impeached. That government should be removed by the will of the people. And immediately we started requesting for citizens to hit back the street. In fact, 21 of October, some of our comrades protested in Abuja after the massacre. We also hit the street first week of November. We have been demanding for it before then, but by November we were able to get our people. We hit the street and there was repression. oppression and all. And immediately the government have already set up a panel October 19. Massacre, they had to increase, but also to investigate. So when we saw Nigerians were not ready for that man, that government that killed his, we had to forces also to demand for at the panel. So going to the panel, it was panel a year 2021 to December 2020, and it
Comrade,
involves
maybe you
works,
can
the
turn off your
lawyers,
video.
the witnesses, gathering of evidences, and continuous reminder that they killed the citizen, because it is of to note the government did not set the panel because it wanted justice. The government set up the panel just so that people to leave the streets, just simmer down. When they got to the panel, witnesses were not.
I'm wondering, Comrade, it's really hard to hear you. Do you think you could maybe turn off your video? It might make the audio a bit better. And there's also a delay. I don't know if you can hear me. Okay. Well, it seems like we've lost him as well. Yeah, so I think we will have to wrap up this section a bit since we've lost both of them. Hopefully, they'll be able to get back together with us. So, just really hearing about both the different circumstances of the struggle, and also interestingly, Ayinka was telling us about how the panels were set up. These panels of inquiry were set up. Are you able to still speak now? Okay, no. How the panels were set up, and he's talked about it being a response of the government to kind of quell the movement and to calm things down, rather than actually something that sought justice. Ayinka, are you able to speak? Let me see if I can hear you now. Okay. So yeah, so just a bit about, I can also speak just a little about the struggle over the last 2 years.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Please, please round us up. Just try to tell us, what do you think the most important things the audience needs to know about the last 2 years of struggle? You talked about, we've heard about the struggle, then the panels, but what has really taken place? What happened to the victims? What happened to the struggle? What has it been able to continue? Has it died? Can you just speak to that? Just for 1 minute, please, and we have to go to the next section.
No problem. So basically, the struggle never stopped, although it was not fully on the street, but through advocacy, continuous demand, press conferences, challenging the government to making sure that there's justice for the victims, that were shot at the toll gate that survived, for those that died and lost their loved ones to get compensations, and also for those that have been in prison, getting them out and demanding justice even for them, their rights taken away from them, just been in prison for months for not doing anything. And also, most importantly, that the government admits that they massacred young Nigerians on the 20th of October, so that Lekki massacre will not just be like the past massacres that we have had, Tiv riots, Asaba massacre, and the others, and they just cover it up and move on. So the struggle has continued, and we also continue to demand for justice. Thank you.
Well, we can't hear you now. We can't hear
Okay.
you.
Yeah, I would say just in 1 minute, can you tell us what is the most important thing you want people to know about the last 2 years of the struggle? In 1 minute, please.
Okay, well, I can do it in even in less. Number one is that the most important thing that people need to know about this struggle is that no single demand of NSAS had been implemented by the Nigerian government. Also, is of note is that police brutality, which was the core of the reason behind NSAS, had not been addressed. In fact, the menace of police brutality has escalated. It had become worse, more or less as though the Nigerian police are on a vengeance mission
Mm.
from the protest offenders. And lastly, is to make people understand that the NSAS was not only about disbanding SARS or ending police brutality. It's a question of systemic justice. So that's all.
Thank you so much, comrades, for sharing that and for telling us about the struggle. We're still going to bring you back on, so please, if people have more questions for our comrades, please put them in the chat. And thank you for your contributions. We're going to hear back from you towards the end as well. Thank you. So we're going to shift a little bit now to Comrade Juan talked about, and Comrade Ayoyinka also talked about really this state violence that has continued, and even an escalation of the violence of the state, without any major changes taking place. But at the same time, the struggle has kind of left the international limelight, has left the radar of so many people around the world. But the struggle still continues, and I know that both of them have been at the forefront of also following up with political prisoners and following up on what state violence is doing to the individuals and the families. And even speaking of which, one of our speakers who was supposed to speak today cannot even come on the show because actually, as this person was posting information about being on this program, state agents were actually contacting their family. And so you can even beginning to even understand and comprehend how massive state violence is on the lives of individuals and how it can even expand, especially when the cameras are off. So here right now we have, and I hope Nicholas will be able to get back on the stream. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Sorry, the life of a mother. I had something on the stove. um, yeah, so today we have here with us. Hopefully, Nicholas will be able to get back on. But Michael, welcome. We're so happy to have you here today. So Michael writes
Thank you.
frequently on elections, party politics, popular protest, and state violence. His interest focuses on popular struggles for political freedom, and he is currently researching the politics of Uganda's refugee policy at SOAS and the University of London. And also on the screen, I believe we have Nicholas Mba. Nicholas is actually an NSARS protester who was recently released after spending 8 months in Kirikiri prison. Kirikiri prison is a very notorious prison in Lagos, where there are still hundreds of protesters illegally detained. Nicholas regained his freedom, and we're so honored to have him here to also tell his story. So is Nicholas there? Are you able to speak?
Yes, I am here.
Okay, so Nicholas, yes, welcome. Can you share a bit about your experiences during the 2020 protest and what you faced since then at the hands of governments?
Okay. I think thank you for the opportunity and greetings to you all. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, my experience and the process was just that during the NSAS, although before the 20th of October, we had some plans and we have some movements going on, just like Comrade Ayinka said. Um, but in my own area, that was in Ojo Books, Ojo local government area of Badagry. So We have been having our movement from 18th October. There was some movement that we had. We organized some group to plan ahead of, since we have been hearing about the protest coming on 20th, so we started earlier to organize for it. So on the 19th, we started from the night of 19th to organize a candle night, like to show a kind of reaction because of a young boy who was killed in Alaba International, close to Ajangbadi there. So he's a small boy about 15 years old. So the young people, the youths were just so obsessed and so upset about his death. So on the 9th of October, we held a candle night for him. Then we used that night to plan against the next day being tomorrow, being 20th of October. So on the 20th, we organized a protest at Vaux bus stop, you know, and our protest was calm, cool, and nice. Like it went well. We were holding our flags, singing national anthems, and there are so much crowd that day. On that day, we had so many youths that came out. There are so many pictures of it. But all this while, I have not taken a notice of NSAS panel before. I didn't even know there was a group like that. But all because of, and I know that most of the people there didn't even have any idea, but because of the anger of how the government is allowing their security, allowing SARS to maltreat the youth, from what you said earlier, the way they treat the young people, molest and intimidate. Like I have several experience of molestation. I have several experience of intimidation by police. Like as an artist, each time, sometimes I go to shows at night. Anytime I go to shows, I must pass through hell. Like sometimes it got to an extent that police keep arresting me to the extent I got used to it. Like up to like 8 times in Lagos here. To the extent they would just carry me around the whole anywhere they like, they'll just drop me off. So, but it got on that after that on that 20th, when we were having our protest, even the soldiers came, as some people came, like some men on uniform, they came because of the way we organized it. And I won't lie for the fact that my face was clearly shown, and because there was no need to hide. I wasn't committing a crime by protesting, so that was the reason why I didn't bother to care about anybody looking at me on. So I didn't give any attention to that. So uh, at a point during, I think from around 3 p.m. in afternoon, I just called some of the group to let them know that we should be doing this with some with some feelings, like we need to care about how the people feel about it. So I told them that we need to open the road for like 30 minutes for vehicles to pass, just to maintain peace. That's what I based on. Then they agreed, and we did it the same way and closed it back till at about 5:30 in the evening before we decided to, get off the road that day. But when I got arrested was a week and 2 days after 20th. That was, I got arrested on the 29th of October. On my way back from the bank, I went to the bank to collect my statement of account for an official use. And this business I wanted to start was something I have already put money inside, but they said I should bring my statement of account so that everything, every clarification, even my international passport was also required. So I gave them every other thing, but it was just remaining to give them my statement of account. So I went to the bank on that day, Thursday, 29th October. Unfortunately, the bank wasn't working. I didn't know that day was public holiday. So, but their gate was open. The security informed me that the bank wasn't working. So I now decided to go back. There was a shop I was handling, I was actually living fine though, because it wasn't in the same, I didn't find myself in the same state I was when I went through all those things. So on my way going back home, I just stopped to, border a Marwa tricycle to go home. All of a sudden, some men dropped and they just drove back to look at me. They stopped and one came out of the vehicle to tell me that yes, he recognized my face as one of the leaders of NSAS. This I was like asking him, what's the problem? What did I do personally? I want to know what is my offense. What did I do? If I protested, is that my crime? Or I want to hear that I fought or maybe I destroyed something. What did I do? But they didn't care to answer my question. They started beating me up, dragged me to their vehicle, took me to a police station. The police didn't mind. Once they heard that he's an NSAS protester, nothing more. Just started beating me, took me to the police station, and I spent 2 days. They later transferred us back to Panti with my belongings. In Panti there, I spent 6 days. The fifth day I last at Panti, I think the fifth day they took us to court. That was my first time of going to the court, appearing in the court. So then at the court, they joined me with, I hope you can still hear me. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah, please go ahead. But
Okay.
if you can round up in just in 2 minutes, please.
Oh, all right. So there I was joined with a boy whom I have never seen in my life as a casemate in the court. I have never seen him for the first time in my life. And they joined him with me as a casemate. They gave us the charge of armed robbery, arson, and rioting. You see, so then the next day being the sixth day of being in Planti.
Oh no. Hmm. Yeah, we just lost Nicholas when he was in the middle of his story. Yeah. So such terrible conditions, of people being picked up on the streets and just being named in these cases, given all kinds of charges. And I know this is okay. He's coming
Hello.
back. Yeah. So if you can,
Hello.
if you can just take us through, for another minute or so. Thank you.
Okay. So I was joined with the guy. So they transferred us to
Okay. Yeah, he may be having some problems maybe with connectivity or with his phone. So hopefully we'll be able to hear the rest of his story if he's able to get back on. But over to you, Michael. I know Steve. I think some of these things must sound familiar to you in your work and in your research and in your lived experiences as well. Can you add on and share a bit about your work on the political crisis in Uganda and the ways that police are still targeting dissidents and still very actively pursuing people and the state of political prisoners? Yes.
hello.
Thank you. Looks like Nicholas is back.
Okay.
Shall I give him a few minutes and then come in?
Yes, please. Yeah, Nicholas, if you can just give us
Okay.
the last few minutes. Yeah, the last part of
All
this.
right. Sorry.
No
Okay.
problem.
So we were transferred to Free Medium Prison the next day. So that was how I started receiving all manner of torture, punishment from different corners, and I was refused access to my family and friends for 8 good months. I was refused access to call and like to even come out, like to see the air, to breathe. So like I went through hell. Now I met so many criminals, like I've like people people that has done all sorts of evil. So like I was so scared. That was my first experience. And while I was there, they keep on bringing boys, bringing men in the name of NSAS. If I'm not lying, I know that over 1,000 people was brought to prison in the name of NSAS protest. But before I left the prison, I am very sure that like the number of people I left there in the name of NSAS was still up to 300 protesters that was there before I left the prison. So as in like, I was refused access to even grant my court adjournment. I I was denied adjournment for like 5 good times to come to the court. I was denied. Each time they call me to come to court, they will not take me. They will just call me out from my cell, yet they will just take us back. So all this while till Proficient, Juwon, AY, Barrister Ayo, uh, everybody, they were just fighting and struggling, and they kept like, even as I was there, I didn't know that they were doing more than what I thought. Like they were fighting for me till when I saw some banners when they took my picture to Alausa, took my picture to different places at Ikeja, like protesting for my release. Till God did it for me. But while I was there, I was told that I should take it that it was God that rescued me to put me there for some reasons that I didn't know. So, but I accepted it. But the point now is that this government is really, really not what we want at all. Because what I have never expected in my life, that is what I passed through. And I am scared, even as I'm talking to you, because had it been that the source of where this came from was not from people I knew, I wouldn't grant this interview because I'm so scared. Like it's very serious that I have to be careful because I don't know when they will come after me or what will be next. I'm so scared of this country. Like it's not a place that you can come out and speak and stand. It's not. It's not at all. So that my experience was terrible. The guy that was joined with me as a casemate was even released before me, and I was still there. Like I lasted for a long time than I expected. But what can I do? When I came out, I thank God that I was alive. I made it alive. So that was my experience. If I keep on talking about the experience, it's terrible. I was stripped naked inside the prison, and I don't know what they poured on my body to floor. They said they will burn me as a dead body. I've never heard of that before. They said by the time they finish with me, my color will turn to black. And when they finished all that they did to me and witnessed and saw that my color didn't change, that was when they got to believe that no, my color was truly from God. It's not that they were the ones saying it. Like they thought my skin is just fake. So they dealt with me so bad that I can never ever in my life forget the experience I had. Never. I feel so terrible. Like I'm so hot. But there's nothing I can do. But if it will happen that I will get a compensation or maybe a hearing, I would love to, because somebody need to hear a story like this. Even them sitting up there, they should hear something like this. They still do not believe that some people went through hell because of this answer. They still some do not believe on it, but they need to, so that they will see us face to face. The other day we went for press conference. I saw some things again that got me mad.
Yeah. Oh,
Seriously,
yeah.
so terrible. So I thank people like you.
Well, thank you so much, Nicholas, for sharing your story and for all your courage. And we're also, so happy and grateful that you were able to make it out alive and to be able to share your story with us. So thank you so much for having the courage to come and share that with us.
Okay.
So I'm going to go over to Michael, who can talk a little bit about how this situation is not unique, to Nigeria at all. And some of the horrors that you describe, I know, are also what is happening in countries like Uganda. So over to you, Michael, if you can speak to that, and also if there's ways that how people can support these victims of state violence, also, and what's happening exactly in Uganda right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nanre, and thank you, Nicholas, for sharing that story. It's really, really heartbreaking, and yeah, it's always the case here. Like talking to
Thank
friends
you.
nowadays, it's like publishing an article, appearing on radio programs, TV. You always have to ask yourself, like, am I safe? That's the question everyone is asking, and yeah, it's really, really sad. It's a sad state of affairs. It's even more heartbreaking to see that Remy couldn't join us for the same reason. So it's really a grave situation. Um, Understanding the crisis in Uganda is really a complex task. I do write and research about the political situation here, and at some point you feel like you're not working, you're not doing a career, a normal sort of course of work. You are fighting for freedom, and the risk is coming to you directly. So you're not studying an object that is apart from you. You are basically in the line of fire. You are facing the state, a very brutal state. But if I can attempt to sort of like give an overview, I would say we need to travel back in time about a decade ago, early 2011, with the walk to work movement in Uganda. I think that's the best way to understand where Uganda is today. So early 2011 was supposed to be a moment of comfort for the regime. Like it was supposed to be a good time. They had just won the elections with an overwhelming percentage at both parliamentary and presidential levels. Museveni had scored 68%, and in the parliament, his ruling party had won over 70% of the seats. And when we talk about elections here, you know what we mean. It's not the kind of credible election. So it's basically a staged election with all the rigging and the violence and the intimidation and the bribery and all those kinds of state abuses. Nonetheless, it was supposed to be a moment of comfort for the regime because it's like it had triumphed over the latest threat to power at that time. But something monumental happened around April 2011 when prices of commodities started skyrocketing. And this was precisely because the regime had spent billions of shillings buying the election, like bribing and doing all this stuff that it normally does. And because of that, the economy was staggering by April 2011, triggering these mass protests in the walk to work movement. So this was a turning point. I must say it was the very first time we were seeing a serious protest movement against the NRM regime. And you could see it even from the reaction of the state. So there was a lot of arrests, a lot of beatings and shootings, and many people were thrown into safe houses, which is basically a code name for torture houses run by the state here, prison, and without any crime. Many of them died there. Others were released 2-3 years later, and others have never appeared, and no one knows what happened to them. So that was the situation at the time. And because of the threat, the immense threat that this protest movement posed to the state, in the aftermath, the immediate years after that movement, we saw the state basically going on rampage, bringing laws that were criminalizing the right to protest, making life very difficult, not only for political parties, but for the population, because here, anyway, the line between the two is almost invisible. So basically, life became really hard. Organizing was almost impossible in the aftermath of the 2011 protests, and there was a robust police state that had come into force. It had always been a very brutal state from inception, but it seemed like it had been loosened, like whatever constraints had been there were finally broken, and it was out to get whoever dared to go to the streets. And so that was like the initial turning point. So by 2016, no one was enthusiastic about the elections. Like, everyone knew what would happen. If you had passed by Kampala in early 2016, you'd have found empty streets. People were running back to villages, avoiding what they knew was coming, state violence again. And so there was a lot of migration to rural areas to avoid a crackdown, that was already visible even before the elections. And so it is no wonder that the elections again, the NRM won in courts the same way that it does, and that it recently did in 2021. So, but the real turning point was around 2017, the second turning point, when Bobby Wine emerged on the scene and with his people power movement. So why it constitutes a turning point is that the energies of the walk-to-work protests were suddenly dressed in demographic attire. So there was an increasingly youth character to opposition against the regime by 2017. And so what happened was we had this sudden sort of contrast between an old regime that was struggling for legitimacy and an increasingly resistant population that was, increasingly challenging the state outside this paradigm of party politics. And so it was a second turning point in the history of opposition to the NRM, because it brought this element of youthfulness. About, I think most estimates say about 80% of the country is under 35. There are lots of statistics about the youth demographics here. And the state was not mistaken about it. It was clear that we are coming out to kill you. There are lots of statements from top government officials, security agencies, warning that if you don't stop this, things are just going to get worse. And so we saw a lot of abductions, a lot of killings, a lot of, intimidation, crackdowns on NGOs, and all that stuff. Most of which is similar to what Nicholas has been narrating. And so it looked like with every sort of like increase in opposition, there was more determination from the state to sort of repress, and yet ironically it triggered more opposition. Even as we went to the 2021 polls, it looked like there was more talk of revolution rather than change through the polls. So and I think in most of Bobby Wine's statements that was sort of explicit, like when he kept alluding to the fact that the elections were simply a route to something else, basically saying, we know these polls are going to be rigged, but what we are doing is to use them to unlock these popular energies that have been boiling ever since the 2011 protest movement. And the state knew, like the script was very clear even to the state, and that's why we saw them sort of perfecting the instruments of repression, and abduction became a very useful tool to the regime. So those happened, and then by November 2020, the regime was clear. They knew that in the aftermath of the elections, there would likely be an uprising, and the question was, how do you preempt this? How do you instill fear in the population to check this? And I believe that was the logic behind the November 2020 killings. So basically, Bobi Wine was arrested in 2020 November. People took to the streets, and then there was this massive shooting. Official estimates say 50 people died, but we all know state figures are always an underestimation of the exact number of people that are killed. So it was a clear statement that should anyone take to the streets after the 2021 polls, this is what is going to happen. This is just a test, a slight test of what's coming. And no wonder by 2021, people were again fleeing back to villages and just to avoid this, growing crackdown.
Okay.
So
this continues to happen, right? And if you can just round up, because we have to keep going. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the point behind the abductions, which is really the thing like grabbing the headlines here today, is that they are on the margins of legality and illegality. They are clearly illegal, but in the mind of the state, the warped minds of the people that run this regime, it's like the abductions are not so grave as to attract widespread international attention and condemnation, but they are also as effective as the killings in sending out this message that, you know what, if you try to sort of like come against the state, you might disappear. If you try to host a talk show, if you try to, get more aggressive in advocating for your freedoms, you might disappear and you might never be seen again. So that's where we are right now. It's really much more complicated than that, but I would need hours upon hours to fully elaborate all the details. But I hope that big picture would sort of capture the situation in some way.
So thank you very much, and it's really good to have the historic context, because I think the history is so important, especially for young people to know that there have continued to be people always push back against the state, right? But the state continues to repress, and so I think each generation comes and also wants to engage in struggle and wants to be active. But like the points that you've raised, bringing us through history, showing that many of these things have happened and have been reoccurring. And also the creation of this climate of fear, the unknown, right? That if you speak, this could happen, is really just continuing. So even if it's not, even if the state's not killing people every day, the fear that this can happen to you at any time is what the state also uses. So thank you so much, Michael and Nicholas, for sharing. We're going to come back to both of you. But we just want to switch gears right now to talk a little bit about political prisoners, to focus more on what happens to people, what happens to political prisoners, and also how we can fight for them. So I'm going to hand over to Crystal for the next part of the conversation. You're muted.
Of course, I'm muted. Thank you so much, Nanre, for a really important dialogue about state violence and what that experience is like, particularly in thinking about the severe repression many of our movements are still facing, even after the grand moments that we saw, right? In the middle of those moments, as we heard from Nicholas's really sobering and breathtaking kind of testimony about his own experiences and the horrors that he suffered alongside many, many people. But to hear from Michael in an entirely different context about ongoing abductions and crackdowns. So in this next part of our conversation, we are going to turn even more attention to this issue of state repression of dissidents. And we are going to take it a step further to really talk about the plight of political prisoners, which one might argue is one of the most invisibilized aspects of our radical movements and one of the most lasting ways that the state attempts to quell our resistance. And so I am very excited to introduce two panelists, and I'm hoping that Banwo is able to join us on camera. But for now, I'll just introduce our guests. The first is Banwo Olagokun, also known as Proficient, who is a writer, a human rights activist, a media consultant, and an artist. He's coordinator of the Coalition for Revolution Lagos chapter, a member of the NSARS United Group, and the Take It Back movement. And Banwo was an organizer at the NSARS Alausa Barricade, which we also heard about from Juwan earlier. And he's been very actively working to support political prisoners and police brutality cases from the NSARS movement. And also joining us is Gabe Bryant, who is an organizer and activist that's based in Philadelphia here in the US, whose work centers the prison industrial complex, political prisoners, and abolition. He's worked on several campaigns focusing on the release of political prisoner Mumia Abu Jamal, including the campaign to bring Mumia home, mobilization for Mumia, and Love Not Fear. He's also worked with the National Jericho Network in the US and on campaigns to free the Move 9, Sundiata Acoli, as well as around incidents of police brutality. Gabe and Banwo, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us. And so let's jump right in. Banwo, aka Proficient, you'll let us know which one you prefer to be addressed by on the program. We just heard Nicholas speak from his perspective. All right, go ahead.
Yeah.
Gabe, would you
You can
mind
address me with Banwo or Proficiency. I'm cool with, but go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so we just heard Nicholas speak from his perspective as someone who was politically imprisoned. Can you talk a bit more about the fight to free political prisoners by organizers on the outside? And also what you have learned, like what can you tell us about the conditions of prisoners in Nigeria as you've been doing this work?
Yeah, it has been crazy, but usually we used to think once you go to court, you get bail, and that's it. But since we have been involved in struggle to release victims of wrong detection, illegal detention, we realized that for special cases like the NSAS cases, they are treated like the state enemy. So it means that there are days they won't bring them to court, and they also deny their detention. They'll say they are not in custody when you demand for it. So most of the time, we have to use people like Nicolas Sumba that are in prison, or they just got out, or at times we go meet them at the court. So they are the one that give us the figures and all of that, and names, So it's hard for you to get even the number of people there. In fact, we discovered that there are 33 inmates in Lagos, but 13 of them that were transferred from Kirikiri to Ikoyi prison were denied by the controller of the prison. And the ones in Kirikiri, like I said, they treat them like state enemies. So they go through tortures. And generally, all prisoners in Nigeria, they don't have access to good food, sleeping space. It is terrible. It is like tries the population of people that should be in prison. The prison was built for 1,000 something people, and now they have over 4,000 in one of them. And the crazy thing is that there's no health care. The health care is like, it's not enough, you understand? So you can't really get what you want, and they don't believe you are sick until you're almost dying. So I had like 24 hours. I had 2-day experience in the same prison Nicholas spent 8 months. And if I have to go through that my 2 days, it will take like 48 hours for me to explain. The whole 48 hours will not even be enough to explain what happened in that prison. And some of them, must have been dead in prison because of the horrible tales we hear, midnight tortures, And in fact, none of these victims that are in prison have anything, the government does not have anything against them. There's no iota of evidence of arson or robbery. You understand? And I also experienced that you can have two cases in the higher court and in the lower court. Like we have 3 NSAS victims right now. They have cases that have two hard cases in higher court and lower court. And I've met other two who also have cases in high court and lower court. And they also give them stringent bail conditions. In Nigeria, the police can just scribble down a charge for Gabe now and say, yo, Gabe, because I don't like you and your shades, I'm writing robbery down. When they take that to court in 24 hours, the judge or the magistrate, if it's a lower court, the magistrate will give you a
Proficient, it seems that we've lost your audio. Perhaps you can unmute your video, or mute your video rather. We'll just give him a moment to reconnect. Though he's providing some really important context for Nicholas's experience and the ways that the government illegally detains and imprisons so many people under horrific conditions, that Nicholas's case is not an isolated one. So perhaps while we're waiting for him to get to a better internet connection, let's bring you in, Gabe. What Nicholas and also Bomo just described sound very much familiar to those of us here in the US in terms of prisons, police encounters, and all of the repression that becomes possible in those encounters and in being under police occupation, as many of our Black communities are here in the US. And many people around the world witnessed and stood in solidarity with the 2020 uprising in the US after George Floyd was murdered. Many of our comrades here participated in solidarity efforts to stand with us and have been standing with us over many years of very visible police violence against Black people here in the US. However, not everyone is aware that there were many people that were politically imprisoned during the 2020 protests, the historic 2020 protests in the US, or that this issue of freeing political prisoners in the US is actually decades old. And so you organized both around long-time political prisoners, but also more recent targets for political imprisonment. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the larger history of working to free longtime political prisoners that you've been a part of, including around the specific case of Mumia Abu-Jamal, who is widely considered to be one of the most world-renowned political prisoners.
All right, free all political prisoners. Thank you, Crystal, and thank you, Nanre, for allowing us to have this important conversation. When I think about the work to free all political prisoners and the work that's necessary and required, I think immediately the past century of work that's been done, not only with Mumia Abu-Jamal, but even a century ago, we look back at the work of J. Edgar Hoover, who led the FBI from 1924 to 1972. And over that span of time was able to actually engage in the warfare against many of our political organizations and entities in that period of time. If you think about going back to Marcus Garvey, where he actually started and actually began by implementing the first Black federal agent, a guy by the name of Jack Johnson at the time, Agent 800, James Rumley Johnson is how he was known, who infiltrated Harlem with the UNIA back in like 1919. That work then carried over through the 50s with Robeson around socialism and communism, and then obviously going towards King and Malcolm and Huey and so on and so forth. And so when it comes down to the early 70s, when Mumia Abu-Jamal is in high school, a student leader at Ben Franklin High School here in Philadelphia, a lot of what happens during that time period is that he begins to be surveilled, which wasn't uncommon at the time, particularly because Philadelphia had at the time a very active party for the Black Panthers, as well as many other organizations. And so he begins to be surveilled and not only become active, not only with the Black Panther Party, but also supporting the MOVE organization, which was and is a life organization, mostly Black-led, that focuses on challenging the state and state regimes. And so one of the things that comes out of this is that now Mumia Abu-Jamal becomes a journalist, and he's a award-winning journalist at that. But more importantly, he's all of a sudden now talking about what's going on with the police brutality in the city of Philadelphia, talking about the MOVE org in Philadelphia, talking about many, many other issues that are facing Black folks here in Philadelphia. And then on 1981, he is brought up on trumped-up charges of shooting and killing an officer. So many holes in the case. He's then imprisoned on July 3rd, 82. And so we just actually recognized 40 years of his imprisonment as of just a few short months ago. Over those decades, he's received not only nationwide support, but global support from folks as far wide as Paris, France, and Germany, to Palestine and Mexico. I visited Paris myself just 9 short years ago and saw folks on the ground organizing on Mumia's behalf. In fact, every week still they organize, mobilize in communities around his case in Paris, France. Also, more importantly, here in the United States, there's been such far-reaching support from folks like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Maya Angelou, Alice Walker, Cornel West, actor Giancarlo Esposito, and so many others. Even across the country, there are several entities who have been working on behalf of his case, like the Free Mumia Coalition in New York City, the Campaign to Bring Mumia Home. I'm a part of also Mobilization for Mumia, and as well, more recently, Love Not Fear. Why this is so important is that we understand that there's an opportunity now to release not only Mumia Abu-Jamal, but all political prisoners. We've seen this in the past decade, the release of several, including Russell Maroon Schultz, who sadly was released after 50 years and made transition, but we did bring him home, to Robert King, to Jalil Mutukim, to Sekou Odinga. And so there's this history of folks being released due to our work. And so we're confident now that we could bring Mumia home after 40 years. He actually has an opening right now in his case that might actually allow us to open up his case and actually give him a new trial. And also more recently as well, we were able to actually get his materials, 40 years of materials, right, from him being imprisoned, sent actually over to be archived at Brown University. And so why that's important is it allows us to begin to continue to raise awareness about Mumia Abu-Jamal's case and allow folks to interface with some very important writings and letters about his case, but also many other cases. And so the work that we're trying to do right now is to not only free Mumia Abu-Jamal, but also to free all political prisoners who have been impacted by the state. And so, now is the best time to do it. But more importantly, we're trying to work to engage many other communities, far and wide, internationally, young and old. I think that there's a space for everybody, people who have the knowledge and the resources to be a part of this movement and to contribute in a way that can bring these folks home.
Thank you so much, Gabe. I'll just mute your mic here. And thank you for rejoining us, Bamwo. We just heard Gabe speak about a world-renowned political prisoner, Mumia Abu-Jamal, and the global movement that has been created around his particular case and freedom. But I think we can see from that conversation that there's much to learn about this sort of longstanding global fight to free political prisoners and how we connect that to the situation that you were describing before you left the broadcast, Banwo. And so I'm wondering if we can return back to what you were sharing about the conditions of prisoners, people who are politically incarcerated in Nigeria right now. And I'm thinking that in our continued conversation, we can connect some of those dots across our struggles, across the experiences of political imprisonment and government repression. So, Bamwa, would you be able to continue?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Absolutely. Like, there's this mostly undocumented struggle against citizens. And Mumia Abijamal was one of those people that we knew over a decade ago. And police brutality is quite prevalent against a kind of stereotype that of people that look like us. So before the NSAS illegal detention, I was arrested by police. I was detained by police as a teenager. Like in my area in Ketu, Lagos, they'll just pick you up and lock you in cell. Then they call it bail. So they'll raid you. Raid is they come around in the neighborhood, pick people up, go lock them, make some money. And even before NSAS, Amnesty International said over 200 Nigerians were killed by police. And we are aware of some of them. Like Joel mentioned earlier, Tina Ezekwe was a young girl selling by the bus stop, got shot, and all of that. So the state is not interested in getting these people released because they set up a judicial panel that found the state guilty of massacre and recommended that they should be released. And some of the cases were struck out. In fact, two of them got out in September. Their case was struck out June 23rd. But imagine a case that was struck out June 23rd and the victim spent July, August, September. They came out September 20 something. Why? Because even the legal workers, like people like registrar, legal registrar, chief registrar, all sort of people that work in the legal service, they will frustrate you perfecting the conditions or the process, whereas you have to take this document to this department. They can make you spend 3-4 months, and at the end of the day, the person will still spend extra months. There's a case of Sunday Okoro who got bail over a year ago, but the bail, he needs 3-year tax clearance. These are poor people who have absolutely no family, no civil servants with tax clearance, 3-year tax clearance. And they even intimidate any civil servant that wants to stand for you as a shorty. So it's quite deep. And gladly, the anti-police brutality movement called NSAS in Nigeria, during that NSAS, I think around 13th of October, it's kind of metamorphosing into end bad government. So people see it as a 1-point vote that is not enough until you fight the entire system. And it was gradually expanding to end bad government because people understand that police brutality is an offshoot of bad government. And that has affected the current paradigm in Nigeria, whereas the people who were part of the NSAS actions and saw the massacre and still aware now recently aware about the detention, because the state is trying to kill the fact that people are in detention. So now that they are aware, it's kind of metamorphosing into a political paradigm where people want to use that, where people want to question their leaders and as well do away with the parties of politicians that caused police brutality. So last week they started making some concessioning by saying, oh, let the DPP and the activists and the civil society visit the prison. So me, Ayoyinka, Oni, and some of our comrades were able to visit the prison, and we met so many people. In fact, there are some other set of people who are facing defilement. That's the worst. That's the worst charge that can get you beaten and no sympathy in prison. And most of these people were victimized by police and landlords, or police and a rich neighbor who don't like them. And they are facing defilement over cases, over like charges that does not have any evidence that can corroborate the claim. It's just written down defilement, and you are facing hell of disgrace and everything. And when I spoke to someone that did you do, they'd be like, I've never even been in a closed door with the girl before. It was the father I had issue with. All of them had defense for their cases. And one thing about prisoner is that the thing I've learned while I was there was that in those 2 days, when you ask prisoners, they want to tell you their nature of crime so as to earn status that, hey, I'm not a petty thief, I was caught with guns. They will tell you what it is. So I realized that most people in prison in Nigeria, they are innocent, They're just innocent, and it's so sad that most of them don't have lawyers, and most of them don't have adjournment dates. I know about 6 of them that don't have adjournment dates. One of them, Farouk Abdul Qadri, he has never seen prison courtroom before since 2020. He has never been to court. And there's also another person who was only in court the day he was arraigned with the fake charges, and he has never been to court since 2020. And almost out of the 33, the 20 in Kirikiri, about 15 of them don't know their next court date. They are waiting on us to get them their next court date. And some of them don't even have next court date. They were not given next court date. Only like 7 of those 15 have court dates, and the court date is November 14 and December 16. Then the scary thing is that December 16, the court might not sit. The judge can give, or the magistrate can give plethora of excuses, anything. I've seen where a judge said there is road congestion and he can't make it to the court, and that was it. The last time the case was postponed from June 23rd, the next date was September 30th. You see that space? From September 30th, the court did not sit. Now, this same court that didn't sit, the clerk, that is whoever is in the court at that moment as the clerk, we give the dates, the new dates. Now, the next date is December 16th for some of them, and meanwhile, some are facing charges in 2 courts. It's so crazy. And they are under starvation. All not just NSAS victims, almost all the victims are under starvation, malnutrition, and diseases because of the overpopulation and lack of good health standard. In fact, Sadiq Sulaiman, who was a 20-year-old boy, he was arrested, macheted in his room, and it was those people that were arrested that are in detention now were appointed by the political thugs, the ruling class political thugs. That's the APC party. This is what almost every inmate and the ones that were freed told me. And they were attacked, some were macheted, beaten, some they picked a kitchen knife and say, oh, they caught them with knife. So at the end of the day, most of these guys, when they come out, they face a lot of sickness. Sadiq Sulaiman is under drip right now for like days. I have the video. He had to travel 4 or 5 hours away to meet his family because you must come out with a certain disease. Either the little you can come out with is skin disease if you don't have TB and all of that. So it's crazy. And because most of our lawyers are pro bono, it's another challenge. And pro bono lawyers get exhausted because justice is expensive, the days are far, the costs are far, the costs are not enough. So most of poor lawyers can't do pro bono. Even rich lawyers don't like to do pro bono where they work for free. So that's why we are grateful to the few lawyers that we have had who work for nothing. So if we can fund more lawyers, we don't have to wait for the government CSO lawyers, but the NBA, the Nigerian Bar Association, especially the Ikorodu branch, their secretary indicated interest in following up the cases and getting the dates for us. And he was one of the first lawyers that were hired for those NSAS cases. He has helped free some NSAS victims too. And most of them just run away. Imagine how many we have freed, and only Nicholas Umba and maybe Pano Robot, who was a tiler. He fixed tiles on the floor. He was caught with a styling machine on his way back from work. He spent like 10 months in prison too. So he can talk too, but few of them have the bravery to talk because it's quite scary. People die in that prison. So hopefully the 30 we have, since the government is making some concessions because they want to play the political card that NSAS victims are no longer in prison, not because they are benevolent. So if they don't do that, we are opening the lawyers that indicated interest. We pursue to the fullest. And if we can get more lawyers, because there are also detainees in Agodi prison in Ibadan or your state, which is like 2-hour drive away from Lagos. Their case is also peculiar. There were 11, there are now 9. One died in prison. One was freed by the police because of political affiliation. No evidences to. They have terrible sicknesses, and we had to push it out by force until people could realize that there are still 9 people in prison. There are peculiar cases like that. The government is just hiding these people, and it's not only NSAS victims. You know, there are many people that just post things against the government that are factual though, and they get picked up, spend days, released without compensation. So there's a whole lot about getting people out of prison. We can't go through it at once.
Thank you so much for offering such a full picture of the realities of the situation in Nigeria, which sounds so much like the situation in prisons with political imprisonment around the world, right? You mentioned the health crisis around prisoners. You mentioned the legal crisis of people not getting their fair day in court, of not having adequate legal aid, but also the emotional and psychological and experiential trauma of being falsely incarcerated, of being incarcerated for fighting for justice, right? And so I want to sort of close out this segment, and we're going to invite all of our participants so far back onto the screen so that we can really talk about where we move from here, right? But before we do that, I want to talk just a little bit, close with a little bit of dialogue about support and solidarity, particularly around political prisoners. Gabe, at the start of this conversation, I mentioned your work around current political prisoners and people who have been recently politically targeted for imprisonment. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about not just the longtime political prisoners that we're fighting for and that we will free, but what it looks like now for a newer generation to be targeted for political imprisonment. And I'm wondering if both of you can also speak about what are the supports, how do we support freeing political prisoners? How do we strengthen our capacity as organizers to really prepare and fight against being targeted for political imprisonment? And so I'll start with you, Gabe. And if you can just, in a minute or so, share some thoughts on that, and then we'll go to you, and then we'll bring everyone else back onto the stream.
Thank you for that question. It's a great question. And I think that, our brother also reminds us of the severe healthcare issues, also with Mumia Abu Jamal, who's had to deal with hepatitis C and, diabetes and congestive heart failure and COVID-19. And so there's so much of these health challenges going on right now in the prisons. Really, there are several ways that people can support right now. First of all, there's one thing that the government would want more than anything else, which is to create a new generation of political prisoners. A lot of that narrative really began, I think, in my estimation, about 10 years ago. Well, I guess going on 8 years ago now, with Ferguson and many of the post-Ferguson activists and activists who were on the ground in St. Louis, who all of a sudden either found themselves in mysterious deaths. All right, I'm just going to shout out and send love to the families of DeAndre Taylor, and I believe it was Darren Seals, but also people like Josh Williams, who had a whole campaign and still has a whole campaign, coming out of Ferguson. And so here in Philadelphia, I'm a part of the Free Ant Legal Defense Committee. Anthony Smith is a local organizer and educator here in Philadelphia, who was brought up on trumped-up charges from the uprisings of the summer protests of 2020 due to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And so what we've seen on the ground is the ability to mobilize folks in communities, block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood. That also means utilizing social media, right, for Instagram live conversations, being in communities, and really utilizing spaces as a means to politicize these issues, right? In many ways, because Ant Smith is an organizer who had political ideas, we understand that the ways that they try to disrupt and also to find ways to immobilize many of our movements, and that includes Philadelphia, right? And many of the folks who he's been able to work with also have had challenges as well. He's only one of many. There were several cases from 2020 where folks were actually arrested and put on trumped-up charges due to issues of incarceration, due to the uprising, due to the rebellions that happened in Philadelphia. And in fact, that goes back to 2015 because we had what was called the Philadelphia 10 or the Philly 10, which arose out of the post indictment or non-indictment, really, I would say, and the freeing of Darren Wilson, who killed Mike Brown. And so there are subsequent uprisings at that point. And that led to a whole year-long standoff with the police and with the courts. And so really for us, it's about, how do we maintain that patience, but also understand that we have to operate from a sense of urgency, which means that we have to take these families seriously, support the families, but also do the back and behind the scenes work of the petitions, the letter writing, and meeting with the legal experts to make sure that our folks can come home and come home safely.
Thank you so much for that, and particularly for underlying the importance of supporting the families of people who are politically imprisoned and also victims of state violence and police brutality. I'm wondering, Banwo, if you can also offer some direction on how we better support our political prisoners. Looks like Banwo might be having some challenges with video. So we'll just give him a moment. And while we're waiting for him to rejoin us, I just want to make sure everyone is aware that in the comments for each of our streams, we shared a link tree, which has links to tangible ways to support all of these campaigns, support for the movement to free Mumia, right? Additionally, there's a GoFundMe link for NSARS and folks who are in need of support still. And so you'll find multiple links for campaigns around political prisoners and victims of state violence that you can directly support there.
If I could add real quick too, Crystal, while we're bringing on Banwo, is that, I would say to write them, right? If you go to the JerichoMovement.com, you can get a comprehensive list of political prisoners, including Mumia Abu-Jamal. Write them. Send them those notices that they're not forgotten. Also, donate, right? Donate to those campaigns. Donate to their commissary. Those are tangible ways to support. And also donate to their medical funds. Many of these political prisoners are aging. And so many of them, again, have health issues. And so many of them also have a medical project attached to their campaign as a means to make sure that they can get the adequate health care.
Thank you for that. And the Jericho Movement site refers to U.S. political prisoners. And we're glad that you can rejoin us, Banwo, to talk about ways to support political prisoners in Nigeria. Are you able to unmute? I think Banwo might be having some additional challenges. So I'm hoping that we can bring back the rest of our panelists. Please put on your video and we will just add everyone to the broadcast once again so that we can really talk across our movements, right? And talk about the pathway forward. So we've heard so much from all of our panelists, and we're so grateful for all of the work that each and every one who is here is doing, right? Whether it's through writing, whether it's through grassroots mobilization, whether it's through organization building, right? We need radical organizations, whether it's through letter writing, right? There's so many different entry points into this struggle. And so we just have a few final questions that are all really oriented towards how do we move forward? How do we strengthen our individual fights? How do we strengthen our collective fights? And how do we grow? How do we continue to grow our solidarity, right? And so the first question I want to pose, and I'm seeing Banwo try to join us again, so hopefully he'll be able to join this conversation in just a moment. But the first question I want to offer to all of you is, we've heard from all of the comments, all of the conversation we've had so far, that our movements are really suffering from serious repression, right? Repression on the one hand, but also the challenges of sustaining a movement after mass protests and global attention have faded away. So what we'd love to hear from you all now is, how do we continue to fight when we're under attack? Specifically, like, what strategies, what approaches are you taking in your context to really navigate the repression our movements are facing, but also how do we motivate our communities to stay in the struggle. And I would love to open the floor, but maybe Juwan, if you have some thoughts, you can start us off.
Okay, all right, thank you. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, all right, thank you. So the thing about the question, and although I couldn't catch much when others were speaking because of bad network, but the story about, if there is anything I can make conclusions around, is that the story of his profession is everywhere. It's a global phenomenon and probably worse off here in the global south. And all I can say really is that there is practically nothing, or there is limit. Let me put it that way. There's limit to what we can do when it comes to preventing repression, because the victims do not provoke violence in the course of resistance. It is the state that incites violence, and it's their tactics. It's the use of violence is the way around which they help to weaken movement. Repressions, arrest are deliberate attempt to weaken movement. So, but from this end, how do we work around this? And I think one of the very first steps is what we are doing now. It is, and I make reference to what we are doing now because the ideology of oppression is a global idea. It is like the ruling class across the world are collaborating to repress dissenting voices everywhere, and they use the same tactics whether in the global south or in the global north. So, and they even have organizations where they discuss and consolidate the tactics of repression. Like, for instance, all of the African Union, European Union, United Nations, they are all institutions of oppression where they come to dictate. Of course, it may seem as though there are some level of concession in which we can get from within all of these organizations, but it does not still distract from the fact that it's an organized system of oppression. And on this side, one of the very first steps we need to take as oppressed persons is to start off with this kind of conversation we're doing around there. And number one, and I think it will be interesting to see a situation where whenever people in Uganda are oppressed, people in Nigeria are responding to same. Whenever people in Nigeria are oppressed, people in Ghana are responding to same, and responding not just in the areas of street actions and petitions alone, but of course in the area of solidarity support, even in terms of finances, because one of the very limitations to even fighting oppression is the fact that is the fact that organizations, movements are deliberately deprived of fundings or resources needed to say prosecute legal cases of victims. And the truth of the matter is that the longer you have a situation where people are languishing in detention, the more difficult it is for you to convince more people to the barricade. And don't forget, it's a tactics. It's a tactics of scapegoatism. That is where they deal with people with the aim of ensuring others don't come to have the courage to challenge them. But if we're able to create a system, whereas when one of us falls, all of us gather around to pick them up and we march in the struggle. So we have to have this kind of ideology that is prevalent among soldiers. That is why we all move together, and we all move together. I think that should be some of our tactics towards ensuring that we are able to at least mitigate or respond properly to the tradition of repression within the respective state government. So I think that's my view. Solidarity is what is most important. Global solidarity.
Thank you so much for that, Juwan. Solidarity is how we came to be here, quite literally. And so we'd love to hear from anyone else who would like to weigh in on how we move forward, how we continue the fight. And if you could keep your comment relatively short, it'll make sure we get to hear as many voices as possible. Would anyone else like to join in?
I'll just say briefly, two quick things. One is I think that in many ways we often talk about engaging folks, and I think for me we talk a lot about political prisoners, but not enough about politicized prisoners. And so those folks have been politicized, up behind the walls. And so once they've been released and been freed, making those authentic and sincere connections and folding folks into the loop to help organize because they have access and resources to folks in a way that will be different from other folks. And so being able to engage with politicized prisoners, make sure that they can make space for their leadership and the evolvement of their actual work, I think has found, leaps and bounds. But also more importantly, what I've seen in Philadelphia and other cities, I know in Philadelphia, for instance, but also across the country, there's this running down the walls project, right? Where it's an opportunity for folks to run a 5K. People might think, okay, why are we running a 5K? What does that do with political prisoners? Well, one, it raises money for political prisoners' cases, right? So we're able to put money on their books, but also it gathers folks from across the spectrum. So whether or not you are the most left-leaning activist or perhaps a bit more centrist and liberal, we can come together and have those really delicate, intricate conversations about political prisoners. In fact, here in Philadelphia as well, I'm going to shout out our brother, Russell Maruchos III, who began organizing a prisoners' families brunch, where we gather together once a year just to kind of engage folks with food. But it's not only political prisoners, but it's families of prisoners as well. So folks who have a mom or a dad or a brother or sister who are locked on the inside can gather together, gain resources, but also over food, also get more information about what has to come and what needs are necessary right now. So it's a great way to not only mobilize just athleticism and sport, but also gathering together in spaces we can move together as well.
Thank you for that. I'm hearing another call for us gathering, us convening, right? But in a different way. Would anyone else like to weigh in on strengthening the fight? How we do that?
Thank you. I think one other strategy is to continue to think critically about the institutions of the modern state as they apply in Africa and their stated roles and their actual roles. So there's a huge disjuncture there. And listening to my colleagues in Nigeria, that's what I could see as the main similarity with the conditions here, and I guess in many other contexts on the African continent, that you have a police, but then what it actually does is to protect the regime rather than the roles that it says it is out to play. You have a party system, but then the reality is this party system is meant to constrain popular involvement in politics by limiting it to some sort of elitist enclave. Or you have elections that sort of play this performative role of signaling to the global community that we are a legitimate liberal democracy. But in reality, what you have are continuous abuses, most of which take place in between election cycles. So I think we need to think beyond the things that have been handed down to us, the institutions that we imagine are, the epitome of modernity, or the things that we think reflect a perfect state as we see it in most of those so-called developed states. So we need to think from below and to look at the roles that these institutions actually play, and to challenge and highlight the situation on the ground as it is. So I'm basically saying we need to think beyond the box, the sort of received wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I think that's an incredibly important point, thinking outside of the box there. I know that Ayo, you may be trying to jump into the conversation. I saw you unmute a few moments ago. So if you'd like to join us, oh, actually, he just left the stream. But also, Nicholas, if you, particularly as someone who suffered tremendously during your political imprisonment and are only recently you've been freed, we'd love to hear from your own perspective, what kind of support we need to galvanize to support folks who are in a similar situation, both while they're behind the walls, but also after they have been freed?
Okay, I think from from the way things are, most people are becoming scared. Like, whenever they mention the word answers because of the maltreatment from the government, even before this anniversary was held, we discovered from the Lekki toll gate that before that day, the security personnel, gathered there before even that day, you know, and it put fear and scare. It was scary to some of the youth, so it made some people not to come out. And also, I think the idea I have is that first of all, we need to get this information to some people and make them understand that this fight is not just for a particular person, it's for everybody. And for the people that I met while I was there, I know that some and most of them are willing, because going through what they passed through, they will do everything possible to make sure that they support this fight once they come out. And even some few of them who are out are also scared about the fight. It's all because of the way they are seeing things going, with the government and the police, brutality and all that. So, but I think that that idea is very important. We need to impact in some people to make them understand that this is just for everybody, and there is no other way to get it done except facing it. Because that is why I myself, I want to always represent I want to be present in everything to let them know that um I am not actually doing this for myself, even if it's showing my face as the victim. It doesn't actually mean I'm just coming out just for my own self, my personal stuff or personal need. No, So I don't know if it's going to be by news, putting it on the news, and again on the newspaper and the books. Like we already have Take It Back movement WhatsApp group where we converse and get some. I also have a group from Ojo there, just to make sure that this thing doesn't just go like that. We need to put this feeling and make it look, make it presentable. And we also do it in a normal way. Um, as a victim now, I will advise that the only thing that we need is just support. We need the support from anyone who is willing. Uh, like, because people are scared. That's the main thing. People are scared. Like I told you, if not the fact that I know the source where this information came from, I would be scared to join this streaming. Seriously. So the thing that will remove this fear from people is the most important thing to do. In Nigeria now, everybody is just scared. Like nobody, people's life are being threatened. No one has the authority to come out to the public and speak about government just because of the way they handle people's life, they handle people's case, the way they treat the masses is not is not something to write home about at all. So that's why you see people being scared in here in Nigeria. So that's what I think we need more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. And I think it's so important that we acknowledge and recognize the very real fears that people have, right? When you see people shot down in the streets, when you see people very severely being politically targeted, even the absence on this very program it speaks to the very real fears that people have about speaking out, right? About joining the struggle. And we have to acknowledge that and work around that to be able to strengthen our will to fight. And so we are coming to the close of our program, but we want to give everyone here an opportunity to say a final word, right? This is the 2-year anniversary of a very important moment in the NSAR struggle. It's why we're gathered here. And so we'd love you to respond to the following. We'd love to hear if there's one lesson of the past 2 years that you would like to pass across to all of us who are gathered here, both in this space on the broadcast, but also everyone who's watching. What's a valuable lesson learned that you want to make sure that we take away from the past 2 years of struggle and also suppression and repression? So what's a lesson, right? But then also, what is one tangible way that you would recommend people support your fight or the fight wherever they are at? So again, one lesson and one concrete step you would recommend people take to strengthen our movements. And so I'm going to invite Ayo, if you can unmute, and hopefully you heard the question, one lesson of the past 2 years that you think is important, and also one step that people can take to support our movements. Are you able to unmute? You were just unmuted. Do you want to try again? Okay, we'll come back to you. Juwan, do you want to give us one lesson and one step people can take to support our struggles?
Okay, all right. Thank you. I think an important lesson that could be picked up from the past 2 years is that one of the major, I think there was one of the major mistake, though it was unconscious, that happened in the course of NSAS is the fact that it was described as leaderless, right? As much as it proved to be a strength, because there were reasons to carry that tagline leaderless, because it didn't want to identify with the rotten bureaucracy of the students and trade union movements. So, but it also had its limitations, and the limitations is that the moment the NSAS movement fell to repression, it becomes very difficult to coordinate. That is to take stock of people who are repressed nationwide, because we only had the story of Lekki. There were many stories in Alausa. There were many stories at Kupiku in River State. There were many stories in Edo State. So the fact, and there were many people also in prison nationwide, many people were killed. So the lack of definitive leadership paved way for so many things that becomes as of today unaccounted for, and including the fact that it also puts the aftermath, put the fate of a lot of people into the hands of opportunists who were more or less careerists and had no links to victims who were actually targeted during the period of repression. People like Nicholas and a number of other persons were blanked out, and the entire process was taken over by opportunists, and the aftermath of the violent repression. So there was that lesson, and I think going forward, I think it should not be a mistake that we should make going forward. There should be definitely, even as much as we try to build democracy from below, right? We should try as much as possible in our struggles to connect with the student movement, connect with trade union movement, not necessarily its bureaucracy, but we can organize youth power democratically. Why not still ceding to opportunism.
Thank you so much. Ayo, are you
So
able
much.
to rejoin us?
Ayo, are you able to rejoin us? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yes. All right, let me quickly go because I've been having very poor network. So the lessons to learn is very simple. Talking about fighting for a better society or a revolution and doing it are two different things. Many people talked about it before 2020, but when the opportunity came, they went to sleep. So there are two different things, and we need to let our people understand that. Then also, we should not shy away from management of funds during struggles. I think that was one of the major issues during the NSAS. Many of us shied away from it because we don't want to be tagged as, handling funds and all that. But funds were mismanaged rather during the NSAS struggle, and it actually affected in the aftermath, because while many of us were trying to maintain the struggle, trying to get people out, fund was a very big issue, for us, and many people contributed during all this. Also, people that donate to struggles should do it consciously, do it with ask so much questions. Don't just give people money because you want to give money. You have to ask questions. You have to know how and what they'll be using these funds for. And also, the final lesson is to understand that the government, although they cannot learn actually because they are not ready to learn, there's crisis management. A lot of the aftermath of the answer struggle should never have happened. Should never have happened if we had a reasonable government that understand crisis management. But I ask myself, how can they manage the crisis that they themselves cause? And the way forward is that we need to continue to identify with people that are still sustaining the struggle, like the NSAS United, and specifically also movement like the Take It Back movement, EIE, and FinWorm, many others that are deeply rooted in sustaining the struggle, getting people out of prison, and making sure citizens are strengthened so that when there's an opportunity to liberate the society, they will not shy away from it. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Let's have Michael.
Thanks very much.
If you would like to add on to the conversation.
Michael, if you would like to add on to the conversation.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about funding. What we've seen, at least from the Ugandan context, is that you have a set of countries funding the opposition, but also funding the very regime that suppresses these kinds of movements. And so some sort of double dealing or hypocritical, funding that basically funds, the Museveni regime receiving military support and financial aid from countries like the US, the UK, and many other countries. And then at the same time, these countries are funding opposition parties. So I think it's hard to make a moral appeal, to those funders that you shouldn't be double dealing or basically funding both oppression and the struggles for freedom. So it looks like the onus is on us, the ones involved in the struggle, to carefully assess who is funding and what kind of funding can we take and what kind of funding can we not take. If you're going to fund the regime that takes away my freedom, then I'm not going to take your money to fight for my freedom. And I think that stand needs to be much more clear, because it helps nothing if someone funds the guns that shoot you dead or the people that abduct you, and then at the same time funds your opposition party. So there is a need to think beyond that, and I think it's very much tied to the predominance of party politics rather than actual popular struggle here. So parties have become a sort of business platform for elites looking to build a career, make some money, and that has become in itself a threat to the actual movement, that's fighting for freedom. So I think we need to think through more critically the question of funding, like where do we get the funds, and what's the credibility of the funder? Yeah, and as well to build links with other movements. I'm really excited about this platform. I like the way that we've been talking, and it's very refreshing to see that we are facing similar challenges. There's no clear solution in sight, but there's a sense of encouragement that we are not in this alone, and it's not just one context. And there are things we can learn from others. There are lessons we can impart to others, and yeah, we can move forward together. And yeah, it's just so exciting to think of Africa broadly, like beyond these sort of Balkanized states, and to think of this as a collective struggle across the continent and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Michael. And you're raising some incredibly important issues that have come up many times on this platform about resources and how the resourcing of our movements and where the funding is coming from can really demobilize and de-radicalize our struggles, even with the great need for resources that we all have. And you're also raising some incredibly important issues around party politics, elections, state power. And I know that we have said in the past that we want to actually have a focused conversation around funding and even things like mutual aid, but also electoralism and state power and the extent to which radical movements should be a part of that work. And so hopefully we'll be able to re-engage you in more broadly amongst our collective here around these questions. Let's bring back in Gabe to answer this question of a lesson and a concrete step.
Sure. I think my first lesson, first of all, is when you misspeak to clarify. And so earlier I talked about the federal agent who was in the UNA. The name is actually James Jones, not Johnson, James Jones. And also our brother and comrade in Ferguson is DeAndre Joshua, not Taylor. And so it's always to have self-criticism in these moments. But more importantly, my brother Mike Africa Jr. has a t-shirt line called "Never Give Up," and in many ways, that's it sounds simple, but I went to my first Move 9 rally in the fall of 2001, and those folks don't get free till 2018, 17 years later. So that tells us that this stuff is not going to be overnight, nor is it going to be in the next week or even sometimes the next year. The campaign to support our brother Ant Smith here in Philadelphia started in the fall 2020. Here we are 2 years later with still a case months away to begin. And so along that time, there have been folks who have been, engaged and some folks who have been less engaged. And I think that in many ways we define ways to never give up, but also how do we maintain space, but understanding the importance of self-care along the way. In other words, if you do need to step back because life does happen, right? Make sure that you can have your tasks and roles shared amongst the group so that nothing gets laid to the side, right? Because one thing that we know that the state does and our enemy does is that they want to quell any movement, right? They want to make sure that they can disrupt it by moving time back. And because life happens and time happens, people will become less engaged. And so if we can really begin and remain steadfast, we can do that by keeping ourselves healthy, by keeping ourselves, forward thinking, and by keeping ourselves engaged. And so I would say to do those types of things to make sure that we can maintain momentum in our spaces.
Thank you so much. Nicholas, I know we heard from you a little bit earlier about ways to support, but any final words about a lesson learned from your experiences over the past 2 years?
Okay. Well, when you talk about experience, and lessons, well, the lessons is just clear. It's very clear that from my own opinion, we don't have good leaders. People who have their fellow human at heart, and the experience is just it's very terrible that I cannot just end the topic. I can't just stop talking about it. As a matter of fact, it gets me upset when I talk about it, just because I don't like reminding myself about my experience, back then. But the main thing is that thank God I am out. But those who are still there, oh man, I cry for them because I know where I came out from. It's, it's a dungeon. Just pray and hope that the right thing will be done and they will be released. And, through the struggle and through the fight we are pursuing, I just hope that they will get justice as soon as possible. You know, um, I don't have much words. It's a thing of joy to know that there are people who really care about some others. And just thank you guys. I appreciate everything and all the efforts you've gone just to make sure we have this meeting and for me to share this experience so far. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. We know we can only imagine how re-traumatizing it is to speak to what happened to you. And we thank you for moving through that so that you could share with us the important information we need to know about what is happening to so many people, not just in Nigeria, but around the world. And it's one thing to know about it in a sort of abstract way, but no one knows better than those who've experienced it. And I want to believe that in hearing your story and hearing your voice and the pain and suffering that you experience, that it's going to motivate more people to do more for folks who are politically imprisoned. And so we thank you. And we also thank every organizer, every writer, every person who has joined us for this important gathering on the 2-year anniversary of a pivotal moment in the NSAR struggle. And so we are going to begin to close out now. And again, thank you all so much for joining us. We want to thank everybody who is watching right now or who will watch in the future. And so I'm wondering, by way of closing, if you, Nunre, want to also give your lesson learned or concrete step.
It's been a very powerful session. I think so many lessons learned. I mean, I think over the last 2 years, it's really been for me a very phenomenal experience to really organize. Being so far away from home, but finding my home, in so many different places, with so many different comrades, and really, I think the lesson learned is just, it's just to continue to find courage, and to be inspired by the courage of others. And again, today, I continue to be, inspired by that. But also, really, the idea of what I think what the Sunday school is about is really just the elites and the powerful forces. They are able to, I keep hearing this, they're able to create this climate of fear. They're able to create this climate of despondency and despair by keeping things in the darkness, by disappearing our people, by fading the news of the struggles from the central media. So they continue to try to bring this darkness, this disappearance of everything, so that the world will not see it. And I think that one of the things, and this is what happened at Lekki Tollgate, and as we were speaking, and I was just thinking about what they did was, they turned off the lights, and so these powerful forces, they focus in ways of darkness. But I think that collectively what we're doing here is just to continue to pull ourselves into the light, to continue to tell these stories, no matter how often, to just keep bringing up our humanity, to keep seeing the faces, to keep hearing the stories, just to never relent on, never to numb ourselves to the pain of others, but to continue to bring out each other into the light and embrace our collective humanity. And only in doing that can we continue and endure, in this struggle that is really a lifelong process of struggle for all of us. So I think that would be just a continuance of many lessons that I've learned even today.
Yes, I really appreciate you naming that. And I think one thing I would just add to what you said is that there's really no substitute for building a revolutionary movement, right? And building revolutionary organizations as part of that movement structure. You know, we are going to experience state violence and oppression and repression until we stop it, right? We are going to experience those things because that is what state power does, right? We are going to have rebellion because our conditions are unlivable, right? And so, what makes the difference between a rebellion, an organic expression of grievance and against our conditions, and one that is able to be sustained and actually transform the structures that will make our lives more livable? And my perspective is always that it's movement. It's movement infrastructure, right? That can sustain rebellion. It can sustain the organic expression, of anger and rage at what we are facing. And so it's that kind of thing that helps us funnel resources to the right spaces. It's that type of things that allows us to check the opportunists who want to become celebrities because of an opening in a protest, right? Like, it allows us to bring people who are coming into political consciousness into a space that nurtures that transforms that expands that. And so I think across our struggles, a need to strengthen our organizations, to strengthen our movements, but also to really, we have platforms like this, we have the means to be in comradeship with each other. And so really strengthening our local movements with this kind of solidarity, this understanding, ways that we can offer support to each other, tangible support to each other. To me, that's where the hope lies. And I think that's where, collectively, our hope that this platform helps contribute to that. And so this is the 2-year anniversary Sunday School. This will not be, the last. And so we will be reaching out very, very soon, once again, to our community that we're building here to bring more conversations with folks who are in the trenches trying to fight for freedom for African people in Africa and throughout our beautiful Pan-African world.
Yeah. And please, if you have not, please check out the link tree. These are direct ways to support that go directly to political prisoners, to people that really need your help, to grassroots organizers that are working directly with families and with victims. So please make sure you check out the LinkedIn, find a cause that you can really connect to, and continue to support these amazing organizers and people that you've heard from today.
Thank you. And until next time, we'll see you very soon.
Bye. Thank you.